I have to turn, oh, there it is, flip it around.
Yeah.
I recognize that.
Yeah, I think we can get started.
Okay.
Turnout, everybody. I'm here to talk about dreams. So I thought I'd start off with an often quoted factoid or fun fact about the brain, which is it accounts for 2% of our body mass, yet uses 20% of our energy. So it's expensive, to run a brain. So during evolution, you'd think it would make sense that we actually shut the brain down during sleep to conserve energy, particularly in our hunter-gatherer days where it was kind of dangerous to go out and kind of get that energy. But we didn't. We evolved to dream of zombies and do other stuff, which is expensive. It takes energy. And why? Why did we evolve to do that? Because of because of the mental evolution, the mental evolution that we go through during our lifetime. We come into this world with a mind that's effectively a blank slate. And what happens is this remarkable process where as we get larger, our brains not only get larger, but also more complex. So our minds can, not only do we acquire vast amount of knowledge, but we develop impressive faculties for processing that knowledge. So how does that work? Well, the mind is produced by the neurons of the brain, and that evolution is a surprisingly simple process. Those neurons, what neurologists, psychologists, and psychiatrists agree is that neurons generate mental structures called schemas. And these schemas are concepts that network together to form everything we know about ourselves. It's our mental model of not only how we work, but how the world works. And so we have schemas for, say, slides, presentation, and lecture. And your schemas in your mind are processing what's happening right now. And it helps you understand the information I'm giving you. Now, if your schemas understand everything that I'm saying, then that process is referred to as a simulation. But if you actually learn something, you need to accommodate that information. And the way you do that is you develop a new schema that holds that concept. And so here, if you had never heard of a schema, or you had heard of a schema, but maybe in a different context, then you're learning something. And in this case, you're developing a schema for a schema, which is a very meta kind of concept. And if I do a good job, then that schema will network to other schemas to help you build a deeper understanding of how it all works. So every one of us has a vast network of mental schemas that has continuously evolved on a daily basis to help us navigate our lives. And everybody's is unique. Our schema networks evolve to fit our lives. If we were to say you have to switch places with somebody in this room, then that would be a challenging thing to do. So how does this network of concepts in our brain evolve over our lifetime? On a certain level, it's actually a very simple process of modification followed by testing. That's what Charles Darwin used to describe his evolution of species. He talked about how a species will vary in his process that he called variation. And then are those variations beneficial, or do they make the offspring less adapted? So he then described how the offspring goes out and is tested by nature. And the changes that are beneficial are selected. So he named the second phase natural selection. This modifying test process is the same thing that engineers use to evolve technology. We all on a daily basis, engineers modify stuff and test it over and over and over. And with each iteration of this process, the system evolves. And what I'm here today is to say the same modification and testing cycle that is all around us, that's developing the technology around us, that's developing our cooking recipes, that's developing nature, is in our head when we sleep. That a cycle, we go into the cycle of modification followed by testing. So I had mentioned earlier that schemas accommodate new information by developing a new schema when it learns something new. So I call the modification part of this process accommodation. That's a psychological term that they use to describe when you learn anything. And then what happens is you have this dream with these so you process dreams, you accommodate the information of the dreams. So you're actually your mind is changed, literally changed at that moment. Did it change for the better? Like, are you now more adapted to your life? Or are you less adapted to your life? Just the way an engineer tries to make an improvement, but we often introduce errors as much as we introduce enhancements. We have to test it. Just the way nature tests its changes. The mind tried to do a good thing when it ran this accommodation phase, but it really doesn't know if you're more fit for the world. So it goes into physiologically goes into a second mode where the modifications are then tested. And during the dream test, it pays attention to how you are handling that test emotionally. So for example here, this woman's dreaming effectively a nightmare. Now, is she thinking constructively during this? Is she saying, how am I gonna get these creatures away from me? Is she trying to fend for herself? Or is she completely overwhelmed? And even though the dream's gonna be terrifying regardless, if she's thinking in a constructive way to how am I gonna deal with this situation, then the mind will say, okay, those changes seem to be okay, let's keep them. But if she's completely horrified and overwhelmed and helpless, then that might be an indication that the schemas didn't work and then they're rejected. So I call the second part of the phase emotional selection, because your emotions are what determines whether or not the schema modifications worked. So there's some really fascinating similarities between these processes. Tests in nature tend to be extreme, quite literally life and death. Engineering tests are outwardly bizarre. How odd would it be if your neighbors started crashing their automobiles together intentionally? You would describe their behavior as bizarre. But when engineers do the exact same thing, it's a rational act. So when you look at your dreams, they seem bizarre until you start to think of them in the context of tests, and you realize that they're not bizarre. And so dreams can be extreme and bizarre, as we all know. So what evidence is there for this theory? It turns out there's lots. When I discovered this theory 20 years ago, I wasn't a dream researcher, I was an engineer. And so I started looking at all the brain sciences for evidence that this is what happened. And so this is my favorite one. So this is a hypothetical or theoretical plot of how a group of engineers might go through modifying a system. So the way it would work is they're in the first modification phase. That's when they do their deepest modifications. They'll take a system apart. If it's an engine, it might be torn apart. If it's a computer system, it'll be similarly torn apart. Engineers will talk about going back to the drawing board or gutting a system. And then how well is it working? Well, they bring it back up, they put it back together, and then they test it. Now, at this phase of the engineering process, the system's bound to have errors. Engineers never get it right on the first cycle. It has errors, then they find the errors, and then they go through another iteration of modifications, but not as deep. And then more tests, more modifications, more tests, and then the modifications start to look more like tweaks at the end. And then right before they put the system online, the last phase is invariably testing. You don't want to modify something and then put it out there, you test it. And then if it looks like it's ready, then you release it. So 20 years ago when I kind of thought of this idea, the first thing I remember from Psych 101 about the sleep cycle. So I went, I pulled up online a picture of the sleep cycle, and I almost fell off my chair. Like, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It just I'm looking at a plot of the mind modifying and testing itself during sleep. So the way it goes is you fall asleep, and your first cycle is invariably non-REM sleep. That's that really deep sleep where you feel like if you're waking up in the middle of it, you don't know where you are, you're groggy. And that's where your scheme is, your idea of who you are and how the world works is modified. And just the way an engineer does, did the mind work or not? So then it does tests, another round of modification, another round of tests, another round of modification. And just the way a system, you don't want to put a system online until it goes through testing. Your brain does the same thing. It has a flurry of dreams before it's released to ensure that your schemas are ready to start the next day. And there's all kinds of characteristics that I'd love to get into with what the dreams look like across these phases, but it all reinforces this idea that researchers have found that the dream themes are repeat across the phases, that dreams get more bizarre as the cycle goes along, which is just the way engineers do. They gently test at the beginning, and then they beat the crap out of it at the end. And that's what your brain is doing with these crazy dreams, is beating the crap out of the mind, making sure it's ready to start. So, having an engineering background, I just wanted to see, it wasn't a theory, something hypothetical wasn't enough. I wanted to see this stuff working. I wanted to be able to measure things, to have some kind of, you can't say it's proof, but some kind of support for this theory. So your brain's evolving, or your mind is evolving through your lifetime. But to what end? Like, what does it mean to have a fit mind? And the answer I found was in just the study of needs. Like, a fit mind can see to your needs during your lifetime. And lots of people have studied needs, and there's all kinds of ways to look at it. This is just one. This is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He's kind of the one most associated with needs. And so he starts at the bottom with his most basic primal needs, and then he kind of works his way up to higher needs of self-actualization and transcendence. So what does this look like in dreams? Well, physiological needs, that's like your need to breathe. Quite literally, like your need to have food, you need to stay warm, you need to not die. Those are physiological needs. And yeah, that's what we dream about, right? It's like somebody losing their breath and drowning and suffocated, all kinds of near-death experience dreams. The next category is safety, and then, again, very similar. You're fleeing, you're trying to think, like, what's my next move? Do I face the attacker? Do I run and hide? How well you strategize determines how well your schemas handle the dream. And I love the one with the zombies, because before I started my research, I had no idea people dreamed about the undead as much as they do. I think what was that show?
The Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead. Yeah, I think that was was happening when I was doing most of my research. But it's a perfect example of ramping up a test to, like, your mind could say, well, let's have the dreamer get chased by a bully. No, that's not enough. Let's put them in a dark alley. No, let's have the undead chase them. And that's like the extreme test. And I've read these I've read 20,000 dreams in the course of my research. I've read these amazing dreams where people were like running from the undead, and then they go back to like save a baby or something. And it's really remarkable, like how brave some people can be in their dreams. And that's the example of a schema network just really working well. Some of longingness and love themes, very common. One of the interesting features of dreams is they can be bad, but they can be good. Like some dreams are just wonderful, some dreams are just awful. So why is that? And the reason is because not only do we need to cope with when things go bad, we need to cope with when things go well. A lot of people might turn to substance abuse or other kind of maladaptive habits when things start going well for them. So the mind also has to tell that you can handle success and being a complete person. So esteem dreams, very similar, things going wrong, missing travel connections, very common theme. And then cognitive dreams, finding new rooms in your home, failing an exam, aesthetic dreams, just being in a beautiful place. Self-actualization dreams, they're the rarest of the dreams. That's when you're just kind of your best self. And then transcendent dreams are actually slightly more common. They tend to get kind of more rare. Well, actually, I'll cover that in a sec. But transcendence dreams are when you, or just transcendence in general, is when you transcend the needs of the self and look after other people. And so you find these remarkable dreams of people helping other people and like that. So I did a study to see how often we dream of these things. And so the bottom two, safety and the physiological needs, that's about a rough proportion of what we dream about. The dark portion or the shaded portion represents bad dreams, or what researchers call unpleasant dreams, and the white is the pleasant or the good dreams. And then so in the same study, I looked at esteem and belongingness, and those a bigger chunk of our dreams. Most of them are in this kind of category. And then the last four categories look like this. So we kind of have about an equal portion of the higher needs to the very bottom needs, with the biggest chunk kind of being around the esteem and belongingness needs. An interesting thing that was actually, I didn't notice this, but one of my mentors pointed out, is that your safety needs tend to be more negative. And so when those really basic dreams of falling, and I mean, we do have positive ones like flying and having superhero strength and things like that. But most of them tend to be more on the negative side. Then they kind of get a little more neutral, and then more on the positive side as you kind of go up the ladder. So I wanted to. So now I'm like, okay, we're dreaming of these needs, but I wanted evidence that if you dream of a need, so the idea is if you're dreaming of a need, then any of the needs in the whole hierarchy, then you're improving your mind's ability to meet that need. Now, that's something you should be able to measure. Like if you're dreaming about work a lot, you should be improving your skills around work. If you're dreaming about getting chased a lot, then you should be able to see your safety more often. And because the biggest chunk was in the middle, I went with the belongingness and love category. So if you're dreaming of belongingness and love, in other words, relationships, then you should be statistically more likely to be in a relationship. So I designed this experiment where I wanted to see if people who dreamed about that, and in particular singles who were dreaming about this topic, would they be more likely to be in a relationship in the future? And so where do you find singles looking for relationships? Well, Plenty of Fish, of course. So I reached out to a dating website, and they said, yeah, sure, we'll sponsor your study. And then, so I had 60,000 people click on the link to my study. 44,000 when I told them you had to write out a dream report. They said, no, I can't be bothered. But 16,000 people filled out a complete dream reports. And they went from one word like love to some of them were small novels of these elaborate dreams that they had. And so what I did was I asked them to score their own dreams. I said, because it's hard to read a dream and know what they're feeling in the dream. So I said, were you attracted to anybody in your dream? And then if so, then who were you attracted to? And then and again, they're positive and negative dreams, like navigating a relationship. It can be positive and negative. And so what I want to see is, were these people were they better at relationships due to their dreams? Were they more likely to be in a relationship in the future? And so I sent them follow-up surveys. They could enroll for the longitudinal portion of the study. And then 3 and 12 months later, I collected their future relationship status to see if did their dream associate with their status in the future. And they were 83% more likely. I was frankly kind of shocked at the number when I crunched it. They were 83% more likely to be in a future relationship if they had dreamed about a relationship. The ones that dreamed about work or other topics were in the other category. They were less likely to be in a relationship. And one of the kind of interesting thing about the study was at the part, I wanted to weed out people that were like already in a relationship because I just was interested in the singles. So at the first survey, I said, what's your current relationship status? 21% of the people were already in a relationship at the start of the study, which kind of made me wonder, like, why are they all playing? But I was like, I have a second study group now. And then so I crunched their numbers. And if they dreamed about a relationship, they were significantly more likely to still be in the relationship in the future. If they dreamed about attraction to somebody else out there who wasn't in a relationship, so if you dreamed about like a former partner or your current partner, you were in that category. If you dreamed about your neighbor or a celebrity, then you were more likely to break up. So in other words, if you dreamed about a relationship with some emotion, then you're more likely to stay in your relationship. Now, I have to point out that these are numbers. Lots of people who are single who dreamed about work found a relationship, and lots of people who were in a relationship stay in their relationship even though they dreamed about something else. So if you're not dreaming about these things, don't get too concerned. But these were statistically significant numbers, so there's something behind that. So I came up with a catchy title, When Dreams Come True, and published this in a journal, International Journal of Dream Research. And so you can find this study if you want to go online, just kind of Google it. It's very jargony and mathy, but it's really, if you just read the abstract and the conclusion, it kind of tells you everything you want to know. So the last little bit is, what can you use this information? Like, is you're having a certain set of dreams? Can you somehow adapt your dreams to like work for you and be in that 83% category or whichever section you want to be in? So if you wanted more of this in your life, but you weren't dreaming about it, if you're dreaming about, say, like work or school or other things, how can you change your dreams? And the answer, like I feel like a lot of women talk about, is pretty straightforward. Just dream less about that. And so, which is a little easier said than done, but you can look at your dreams and say, geez, like, why am I dreaming so much about work? And a lot of times it's based on like an insecurity that in your schemas, and our schemas, as much as they model everything we hold to be true about ourselves and the world, they are dead wrong about lots of stuff. There's all cognitive bias, all kinds of studies about how you believe that you're not good at something, or you believe you're superior to something, but there's no data in your life to back it up, and yet you still believe it anyway. So that whole body, you can look at that, and particularly with like dreaming about work, it's sort of insecurity. So during your waking life, you're like, geez, well, like all my performance reviews have been good. People have looked to me for help. I've done well in my career. I can pay the bills. Like, why do I dream about these things? And a lot of times, and as you kind of question, and this is kind of a cognitive therapy thing, and there's also a schema therapy thing, where if you look at your schemas and you say, is that accurate? Is my belief accurate? Then you challenge your schemas, and you can start kind of dislodging them and freeing them up, and that gives your mind an opportunity to put in more healthy schemas or more constructive schemas. And so as you free up your mind from journal work, then you might go on to like zombies or something like that. And then, but then like once you figure out why you're petrified of zombies, then hopefully you'll kind of land more like what you want to do. So our daily lives, like we're preoccupied with certain concerns. But I think it behooves us to look at our dreams and see what your mind's really working on while you're asleep. And chances are there's a strong correlation to what's going on in your life. And so I look at that. So why do we dream? So if you're at a cocktail party and you want to sound impressive, you can say, I think dreams modify intestinal schemas to satisfy our future needs. But what I like to say is just dreams evolve your mind. It's the same thing. So that's the subtitle of my new book. That's all I got. So I thought, so it's available this summer. Which is, and on the back table. So yeah, I thought if anybody, if I gave this lecture once to some researchers at Harvard, and I went on for 2 hours and I ran out of time with that. So it was like lots of stuff that I just kind of either glossed over or didn't even touch. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
If you do want to modify your dreams, I have a lot of dreams about work, and it's always about my equipment not working and
Yes,
frustrated.
very common dream, yeah.
Yes.
That's that esteem category, like you feel like you're failing and stuff like that. And the interesting thing is people that have those dreams tend to be like actually the most successful and the most competent people. Like they wind up like me, like overeducated, like doing all this stuff because they're afraid. So yeah. So and honestly, I have those dreams, and that's something I've been looking at too, and like kind of asking. So that example I was giving earlier, that was kind of.
How would you go about modifying your dreams? Like, is there a way to take steps to have?
So that's what like the cognitive therapy. So cognitive therapy is this idea that you have like a second voice in your head. So while you're doing something, it's saying you're doing this wrong, you're not going to do it right, you're fooling everybody. You know, it's that whole like imposter syndrome thing. So that's kind of like the little voice in your head that's everybody has, and cognitive therapy is start talking to that voice and like what do you and I get a little. I'm not a psychologist, so I just kind of read a lot about this stuff. But you start talking to the voice and questioning it, because I get into it a bit. There's all these kinds of studies about just about how wrong we are about like our abilities, like both inflating our abilities and underestimating our abilities. So just kind of challenging that kind of voice in your head or your thoughts is how you start kind of dislodging it. And that's a very common, aside from dreams, that's just a very common process anyway. It's just kind of figure out where, what you say. And what I'm saying here is like, you might want to look at your dreams to see, like, to help reinforce like what you're doing. And I'll throw it in a interesting, so you brought up an interesting topic. It's about recurring dreams. That's referred to as recurring dreams. And that's, again, it's like an engineering kind of idea, a systems idea of, your mind. So the good news is your mind has identified that it wants to work on this. And that's what it's working on it. And that's why you have these dreams that recur. And it's very common, like soldiers that undergo trauma, they'll relive the trauma in the dreams because their schemas have been damaged. And so they'll have these dreams over and over again as their mind tries to fix the schemas that get them more where it wants to be. And so if it's working, if emotional selection is working, you'll see a progress. You'll see like the dream getting able to evolve. Your ability to master the dream, as there's a term they use. And if your schemas are working and you find you're able to handle this better, if you can't find the cords to the computer, which was a concern like an hour ago, then if you just kind of like, oh well, I'll just kind of wave my hands and talk. And if you find you can handle that dream better, then that's a sign your schemas are improving. But it's when they're not improving, then that's kind of when you might want to kind of start thinking a little harder on it. I'm gonna do a little book signing if you want to buy your book or just go back and chat.